We'll be getting you all the top stories from India and the region. I'm Gautam Roy. And for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague Jagrati Dave from Washington DC. Glad to have you with us, Jagrati.
Good to be with you, Gautam. It's 10 a.m. here in Washington, 4 in the afternoon across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes. Campaigning in the US election heats up with a road trip, a presidential debate and a TV interview all in the pipeline. And there are developments on efforts to calm tensions in the US-China relationship. We'll cross to our correspondents around the world. But first, the headlines.
The Kremlin dismisses Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's talk about a plan to end the conflict, which he said he'll present to US President Joe Biden. Russia says it will fight on. Democrat Kamala Harris's presidential campaign is set to launch an ad campaign tying Donald Trump to Project 2025, a set of hard-right policy proposals his backers hope the Republican will adopt if he returns to the White House. And the Indian government clears 12 industrial nodes under the National Industrial Corridor Development Program to build world-class greenfield smart cities. Well, first up, Russia has said its forces have defused unexploded US-supplied munitions fired by Ukraine near Russia's Kursk nuclear power plant on Wednesday. Russia's National Guard, Rosgvardia, said that its sappers had found a shell from a US-supplied HIMARS multiple launch rocket system 5 kilometers from the nuclear power plant and a rocket fragment stuffed with 180 unexploded munitions. The soldiers were seen inspecting fragments of the rocket. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has dismissed all talk of Zelensky's plan to end the conflict and said that Russia will keep fighting. Also, an oil depot in Russia's Kamensky district in the Rostov region was found to be set on fire after a purported drone attack by Ukraine. A Telegram channel close to Russia's security services said 3 tanks were burning after 2 drones fell on the territory of the oil depot. The attack comes while tanks were still on fire at another Rostov oil depot in Proltavsk district, while Rostov's governor, Vasily Golubev, said 4 Ukraine-launched drones were destroyed over the region. He added no casualties were reported and the firefighters have put out the fire. Let's get you more on these developments with DD India's Dasha Chernashova joining us live from Moscow. Well, hello to you, Dasha. Now, at an intelligence conference, CIA's Deputy Director David Cohen has just said that Ukraine intends to hold on to Russia's captured territory for some time while heat builds up on President Putin at home over these losses. Now, what's Moscow planning to do about it?
Well, Moscow has said that it is going to squeeze the Ukrainian troops out of its Kursk region, and this is precisely what the Russian Ministry of Defense says it is doing as we are speaking and has been doing over the past 3 weeks. Now, we understand that Moscow is conducting the strikes on the Russian territory against the mobile formations of the Ukrainian military. They are conducting reconnaissance operations in the forests of the Kursk region and also striking the Ukrainian military-industrial complex in Ukraine in order to make sure that the country has less and less weapons that are constantly being supplied from the West. In the meantime, the evacuations of people have been ongoing, and Moscow has been saying that it is going to be in accordance with all the norms, in accordance with all the standards, so that the people are provided with the decent accommodation and provided with the opportunity to continue their livelihood. However, it is obviously difficult for the residents because because many of them live in their houses with cattle, with pets in those border areas. So politically, Russia is saying it is not going to engage into any sort of negotiations with Ukraine. And the Kursk incursion was one of the steps by Kiev that Moscow sees has put the long holds on any possibility of ceasefire negotiations with Ukraine. And we are hearing the Russian authorities constantly reminding that they are producing more and more weapons. They have accelerated the military output here domestically, and that is going to help, Moscow says, to fight against the Ukrainian regime, as Russian authorities describe the authorities in Kiev. So certainly the understanding here in Moscow, it is not the question of if, but rather than when Moscow is going to squeeze out those Ukrainian troops from the Kursk region, while Moscow says it is not going to help Ukraine improve their negotiating positions.
Right. And are there certain guidelines or certain lines that Moscow will draw? Because right now, of course, it's a territory, but you have Ukraine pressing Western allies to let them use their supplied weapons to strike deeper into Russian territory.
Well, with regard to the possibility of use of those Storm Shadows, for instance, or other long-range weapons against the Russian territory, Moscow has said that any discussion on that is like playing with fire, and that is these are the words of Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. So Russia is sending yet another message that it is going to revise the use of its nuclear doctrine when those types of weapons could be used. And this is obviously a message that we have been hearing from Moscow before, when the attacks were taking place against the Russian civilian population. And Moscow is once again using this card and sending the message to the West that this is playing with fire, and if those types of weapons are used against the Russian territory, then the response, Moscow says, to that will be far more harsh than we have seen before.
All right, Asha Chernyshov, thank you so much for joining us from Moscow. Let's now turn to the US presidential race, where campaigning frenzy is going up a notch each passing day with an ad blitz and news network TV interviews in the mix. Jagrati Dave is in Washington, D.C. to give us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Now, Jagrati, a lot is happening in a build-up on both sides, both the Democrats and the Republican, in a build-up to the 10th of September, which is the first presidential debate. But is that completely locked and loaded now?
Well, Gautam, things are definitely going up a gear, with US Vice President Kamala Harris preparing a return to the campaign trail with plans for a two-day bus tour in Georgia with her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, which is scheduled to begin on Wednesday and culminate with a rally in Savannah in Georgia on Thursday. The tour will include the first campaign events Harris has held since her acceptance of her party's nomination last week at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Now, their bus tour in Georgia will be the first time the two have campaigned together through that state. Harris will also launch an ad campaign aimed at tying Republican Donald Trump to Project 2025. This is the first is being released in the run-up to her scheduled September the 10th debate against Trump that's due to be broadcast by ABC. Now, Kamala Harris and her running mate Tim Walz will also sit for a CNN interview on Thursday after weeks of criticism from Republicans and some Democrats and some in the media that the Democratic presidential candidate hasn't allowed journalists to press her on issues. It'll be Harris's first interview since becoming the Democratic presidential candidate after Joe Biden ended his campaign for re-election on July the 21st following a shaky debate performance. And while Harris has occasionally taken questions from journalists on foreign policies and economic policies on the campaign trail, she's yet to do a one-on-one media interview or hold a formal press conference. Now, for more on Harris's tour of Georgia, let's speak to DD India's Kate Fisher, who joins us live from Washington. Hi, Kate. Just take us through why this emphasis on Georgia?
Hi, Jagrati. Yes, this state has suddenly become competitive again. When Joe Biden was still the Democratic candidate, it seemed to be slipping out of the Democrats' hands. They only won it by a few thousand votes in 2020. But since Kamala Harris has become the candidate for the Democrats, it's once again back in play, and Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are trying to maximize on that momentum coming out of that successful national convention. This is the first state they're going to after that, and they're really putting a lot of effort into it with this bus tour, because now they think they have got a chance again for the Democrats to take it back and use it as a way to win enough electoral votes to win the presidency. They are going to be going to some of the smaller, more rural parts of the state, which where Democrats who live in these places have often complained that they don't get enough attention from the National Party. They're going to go to these smaller areas, really trying to get the vote out in those smaller, rural and often more conservative areas. The thinking behind this is that they may not win those more conservative areas, but if they can kind of narrow the gap there, that's going to help them take them over the line for the state as a whole. And they're also hoping that Tim Walz, who is a white man, a more conservative Democrat who's managed to persuade some of those more conservative voters in his home state of Minnesota to vote Democrat, they're hoping that he will have that effect on some of those more moderate conservative and perhaps even Republican voters in that part of the state to try and switch them over to the Democrats. It's all part of the Harris-Walz push to try to get these swing states going back into the Democrats' favor, and that's why they're spending so much time and money on this key swing state.
Thank you, Kate. It's all to play for in these competitive areas. That was Kate Fisher reporting for us from Washington. Now, former US President Donald Trump has been charged in an updated indictment in the election interference case. Special counsel Jack Smith's team made the changes following the recent immunity ruling by the US Supreme Court. Donald Trump has denied allegations that he sought to overturn his 2020 election defeat to Joe Biden. Separately, Donald Trump has spoken again about last month's assassination attempt at a campaign rally in Pennsylvania. During a TV interview, he said he believed God had protected him that day.
I mean, the only thing I can think is that God loves our country and he thinks we're going to bring our country back. He wants to bring it back. It's so bad right now what's happening when you look at the crime, the horrible things that are happening inside our country, and it can be solved. It can be solved fairly quickly. It has to be God. How can you say it's luck when it's, 20 million to 1? Okay, I mean, it's just not possible that I was in that position. It's the only position where that bullet could have missed.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, says the conspiracy charge against Trump was an attempt to interfere in the upcoming election in November. Vance insisted that presidents, like judges and police officers, should have some immunity.
Well, I think just my pushback on what they said is, look, if the president doesn't have some level of immunity in how he conducts his office, in the same way that judges have to have immunity, police officers have to have immunity, there has to be some recognition that people can't be sued for doing their job. And, the way that I think about it is try to make this nonpartisan.
Now, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's selection as the Democratic vice presidential nominee has caused a stir in China. Walz visited the country numerous times and taught English there in the late 80s. Speculation has mounted over whether his past could shape the future of US-China relations should the Democrats win the White House come November. William Denslow reports from Hong Kong.
You're sure?
Washington, D.C. is over 8,000 miles away. But for Democratic supporters here in Hong Kong, the race to the White House is very much in focus. For Danny Eldasani, there's a personal connection. Like vice presidential hopeful Tim Walz, she's from Minnesota. They attended the same state university and both moved to this part of the world to teach.
The fact that he was a teacher for so long, he knows what students need, what families need, I think is very important. And he brings that fresh perspective to the party.
And it's that perspective that's garnering international attention.
People here are certainly excited about what Tim Walz brings to the Democratic ticket. and his long-standing links to China have created a buzz across the wider region.
Wall spent a year teaching in China and has led a number of trips to the country with American students. He also speaks some Mandarin. Those links led to Wall's trending on social media site Weibo after he was chosen as Kamala Harris's running mate, sparking speculation over what it could mean for US-Sino relations.
He's going to emphasize restoring academic and people-to-people exchanges. And yet when it comes to core value-centered and even geopolitical interests, such as, for instance, the technological rivalry in race, or on American stances and positions on Chinese domestic politics, I don't forecast substantial deviations.
Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump says Harris-Wall's administration would be soft on China. But many analysts expect a continuation of the policy seen under President Biden.
The U.S. will try to use a more multilateral approach in probably collaborating with its allies or different countries beyond China.
Democrats here say they're energized by Harris's VP pick. But before Tim Wall's foreign policy credentials can be tested on the world stage, he must first convince the American electorate that he's the man for the job. William Denslow in Hong Kong reporting for DD India.
Now, top Chinese and US officials have discussed holding a new round of talks between their heads of state after China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi met US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Both sides also agreed to hold video calls between their two militaries at an appropriate time, according to the readout from the meetings which took place in Beijing on Tuesday and Wednesday. This is Sullivan's second day of talks, with Wang Yi and others aimed at calming tensions between the two superpowers ahead of the US election. The meetings will last until Thursday and are expected to cover a range of areas where the two countries are at odds. Now, the Remington fire, the largest wildfire of Montana's 2024 season, has scorched nearly 200,000 acres of land in southeastern Montana. Originating in Wyoming last week, the fire spread rapidly due to strong winds and dry conditions. Despite being 50% contained, residents near the fire's perimeter remain on alert as unpredictable wind shifts could ignite new flare-ups. The National Weather Service has issued red flag warnings due to low humidity and high temperatures, which are further complicating containment efforts. And that's it from me in Washington. Back to you in the studio, Gautam.
Well, thanks for that helping hand from Washington, Jagrati. And still to come on DD India Global, Britain's Keir Starmer meets Germany's Olaf Scholz in Berlin and strikes a new bilateral pact in a bid to reset ties with Europe, but no back to Brexit yet. And stars of Tim Burton's long-awaited 1988 comedy horror classic sequel Beetlejuice light up the red carpet at the Venice Film Festival on opening day.
This week on Defense Dynamics, we will tell you about defense and diplomacy panning out from Poland, Ukraine and right up to United States of America. What does this mean in real tangible terms? How does this underscore India's multipolar worldview by exercising strategic autonomy and much more? Also, what's the strategic implication of Indian military officers being stationed with different US commands? Watch Defense Dynamics this week on Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. IST on DD India.
You're watching DD India Global. I'm Gautam Roy. Now, Israel Defense Forces have reported that 10 terrorists have been eliminated as forces from the Kafir Infantry Brigade, the Doordarshan Special Forces Unit, engineering forces and other units continue to operate in what the IDF described as a broad operation which is focused on 3 refugee camps in Jenin, Nur al-Shams in Tulkarm and Al-Farah. During the operation, the forces exchanged fire with terrorists and arrested a number of wanted persons. Most of the terrorists were eliminated in 2 airstrikes. The IDF also said its forces continue to operate even at this time, and that the fighting is expected to continue for an extended period of time. Additionally, Israeli forces have sent tanks deeper into Khan Yunis region in southern Gaza Strip and launched strikes across the enclave. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer received military honours at the Chancellery in Berlin as German Chancellor Olaf Scholz welcomed him. The two leaders held talks on a new pact they hope will bring about an unprecedented degree of bilateral, military and other cooperation. During the joint press meet in Berlin, Chancellor Scholz said that he is delighted about Starmer's bid to improve British-EU relations, while the UK PM said that the new pact with Germany is a big step towards enhancing relations with the rest of the European Union.
UK-Germany treaty, a once-in-a-generation chance to deliver for working people in Britain and in Germany. A new agreement, a testament to the depth and potential of our relationship, with deeper links on science, technology, development, people, business, culture, a boost to our trading relations.
But Starmer also later said that this will not reverse Brexit. Now, Japan braced itself on Wednesday for what officials say could be one of the strongest storms to ever hit the country's southwestern region. Some residents in the path of Typhoon Shanshan have been ordered to evacuate. Major firms such as Toyota have closed their factories. Airlines and rail operators have cancelled some services for the coming days. The country's meteorological agency has issued an emergency warning as well, and authorities have issued evacuation orders for more than 800,000 residents in Kagoshima Prefecture, in southern Kyushu, and central Japan's Aichi and Shizuoka prefectures. And in news just coming in, French authorities Wednesday released Telegram CEO Pavel Durov from custody days after he was detained over allegations that the messaging platform was being used for illegal activities. The judge will decide whether to place Durov under formal investigation in connection with a probe into organized crime on the messaging app. In a landmark decision on Wednesday, the Indian Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, chaired by Prime Minister Modi, has approved 12 new project proposals under the National Industrial Corridor Development Program with an estimated investment of over $3 billion. The move is set to transform the industrial landscape of the country, creating a robust network of industrial nodes in cities that will significantly boost economic growth and global competitiveness.
ये 12 नए इंडस्ट्रियल एरियाज कंबाइंड इनमें इन्वेस्टमेंट सरकार की तरफ से आएगा 28,602 करोड़ का 28,602 करोड़ का और वंस दीज कॉरिडोर्स एंड नोड्स आर डेवलप्ड उसमें इन्वेस्टमेंट पोटेंशियल है 1.5 लाख करोड़ 1,52,757 करोड़ और करीब करीब 10 लाख एम्प्लॉयमेंट का इसमें पोटेंशियल है.
Let's also take a look at some other stories making news around the world. Now, the 81st edition of the Venice Film Festival has kicked off with the world premiere of Beetlejuice. The film is a Warner Brothers release and is premiering out of competition at the festival before hitting theatres worldwide next week. It's Tim Burton's sequel to the 1988 comedy horror classic by the same name in the singular. Air traffic was halted at Netherlands' second largest airport, Eindhoven. A technical issue resulted in the cancellation of at least 14 flights. 3 other flights were diverted and many were delayed. Dutch emergency services also reported a national outage which disrupted its usual alarm and communication system. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez was welcomed by Mauritanian President Mohamed Ghazouani. In a joint presser, the Spanish PM addressed the issue of migration and announced a series of agreements with Mauritania. Along with the circular migration program, an agreement to renew cooperation between the two nations' security forces was also announced. Now, the National Football League in the US on Tuesday approved a new rule allowing owners to sell a part of their franchises to private firms at a special league meeting in Eagan, Minnesota. Reports suggested that the private equity firms intend to commit $12 billion in capital.
Very deliberate on this private equity. I think it's, an access to capital that I think has been interest to us for a long time. Other leagues are doing it. We're doing with a cap of 10%, so much less significant position. But I think it's an appropriate thing to give teams that liquidity and to reinvest in the game into their teams. And I think it's a positive development for us. And I don't think all teams will take advantage of that, but they will if they need that. I think it's a very good opportunity for them.
And rehearsals for the opening ceremony of the Paris Paralympic Games 2024 were held by organizers at the La Concorde Square in Paris. The Games will officially begin after the opening ceremony tonight. And that's all we have for this edition of DD India Global, but let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. And for those on the go, you can get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on DD India's mobile app. It's available on both Android and iOS. You can scan the QR code on the screen and download the app now. And we'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Gautam Roy, and from all of us here in Delhi, thanks for watching DD India Global.